welcome to this session at the Wheeler Centre, which I'm so looking forward to. My name is Jane Sullivan. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist and a novelist, and I'm very, very happy to be here this evening. And in a moment, Anita Shreve is going to join me and we'll have a chat, and then in a little while you'll get chances to ask questions too. But first of all, I want to introduce Anita to you. Now, mind you, I'm sure that most of you are very familiar with Anita's books and know and love, I feel you know and love her already in a sense. But just to remind you a little, Anita Shreve is one of the world's best-selling and best-loved novelists. She grew up in Massachusetts, just outside Boston. She worked as a teacher and then as a journalist until she published her first novel, Eden Close, in 1989. And since then, she's written 16 novels. But her fiction really took off in 1999 when Oprah chose her sixth novel, The Pilot's Wife, for her book club. And as we know, when Oprah strikes, success is to follow. The Pilot's Wife was made into a television movie, and another novel, The Weight of Water, has been made into a film. And her latest novel is Rescue, which is the story of a very rocky love affair between a paramedic and a wayward woman from the wrong side of the tracks and their daughter. If I'm thinking how to describe her fiction, I would say relationships between couples, between parents and children, emotions, life-changing moments that happen to ordinary people. And as some reviewers have said, life deeply felt. And another nice comment I like, her piercing devotion to matters of the heart. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anita Shreve.
Thank you for that. That was very nice.
Well, here she is, and Anita, I'm going to go right back to the beginning and ask you about how you became a novelist, because you were a writer at quite a young age, weren't you, I think?
Well, I was. I taught high school for a while, and then I did something that now, from the point of view of a parent, it seems appalling to me. But I quit in the middle of the fifth year. I had this very panicky sensation that I had to start writing. It was now or never. And I didn't quit in the middle of the 2 semesters. I quit with 2 months left to go in the year. And I'm sure the parents were absolutely furious at me. But I started writing short stories. I know it was absolutely the right thing to do. I wrote short stories and I sent them out, and it was a time of great rejection. And the stories that I did publish were published in literary magazines where the pay is 6 contributors' copies. And I quickly learned that you couldn't make a living writing short stories, so I then turned to journalism, and I worked in Nairobi, and I worked in New York City, and I was a journalist writing for a lot of different places, but all that time I'm trying to figure out a way to get back to fiction, and finally I did.
Yeah, and you wrote it. In fact, it goes back earlier than that, doesn't it? Because you wrote short stories as a child, I believe.
Yes, poems, actually.
Oh, poems,
yes,
was it? Yeah.
Yes. I wrote them literally in my closet with the door shut and a flashlight, and I sent them to a magazine in the States called Jack and Jill magazine, and that was my first experience with rejection.
Oh.
And I did it in the closet because in my family, my family were terrible teasers, and writing was not on anyone's radar screen. Today, if your child says he or she wants to be a writer, it's really celebrated. But then it would have been like, I would have been in for such a ribbing. So I did. I wrote in the dark in the closet.
And got rejected.
Yes, I did. I did. But it would have been great not to be, because then I could have come out of the closet and said, look what I did.
And I read that you actually said that you could have papered your bathroom with rejections of the short stories.
Yes, during that era, which was about a 2-year period, probably 18 months, I was living off the savings from having been a teacher. I used to joke that I could paper my wall, paper my bathroom with rejection letters. And then about 15, 20 years later, I found a carton with all the original, and they're actually pretty amusing, the letters. But you see, you could get a form letter, but at the bottom, an editor could have written, like this one a lot, try us next time. And that could set me up for 2 months.
That's very encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you did, in fact, write a couple of non-fiction books first, didn't you, while you were a journalist? And they're on sort of feminist themes?
They were. They actually came out of articles for the New York Times Magazine. And the joke is that if you write an article for the New York Times Magazine, you might as well write a book, because they've made you do so much research, and they've made you write it over and over and over again. So actually, I did. One of them was about the role model of working mothers as a positive for daughters, and the other was my assignment had been to look up a consciousness-raising group that had met 15 years earlier, and then go out and interview them and find out if it took.
And did it take?
Yes, it took, absolutely. They'd had varied life experiences, and not all, in fact, I would say the majority were not happy, but they certainly, they did not go out into the world naive. They really knew what they were about as women.
And all this time you had this burning desire to write fiction, and I believe you approached your agent and said you wanted to write a novel, and you were told very firmly not to even think about it.
Yes, I did. I had been writing journalism in the 2 books, and so I was making a living writing nonfiction, and I went, I talked to my agent and I said, I'd really love to write a novel. And she did one of these things where she said, don't! And I said, why not? And she said, well, first of all, I wish I had a nickel for every author who's come up to me and said he or she wants to write a novel. And second of all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You can make a living, you can actually make money, make a living doing nonfiction. Why would you want to upset that and to write a novel? And then I went home and I said to a former husband, I'd really like to write a novel. And he said, you can't write a novel. It takes a massive intelligence to write a novel.
That might be one reason why he's a former husband, possibly.
Hence the former. Anyway, what I did was I took the advance from a nonfiction book and wrote in secret, again, not in my closet, but I might as well have been, my first novel, Eden Close. And when it was finished, I showed it to my agent, and she was able to sell it for a very modest amount, but it was enough to allow me to turn the corner. And I've done nothing else since.
Just took off, yeah. And the moment that I guess that everyone would be really interested to hear about is when you got the phone call, not from Oprah herself, but from someone who worked from Oprah, but you didn't even know it was a person from Oprah, did you?
Yes. Well, at the time I lived in Western Massachusetts, and for some reason I found it necessary to go to Portsmouth, New Hampshire that day, which is kind of far away, to buy a dress. I don't now remember what the dress was for, or whether I bought it, or why I thought I had to go there. But this was pre-cell phone. I think people had cell phones, but I didn't, and pre-car phones. And I was supposed to be home at 6, and I didn't get home until 8. And when I got home, my husband was at the back door, and he was fit to be tied, and he said, you have got to call this guy. He has been calling all day. He's driving me crazy. I told him you would be home at 6. You've got to get this guy off my back. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's some little literary group in Chicago. So I went to the phone with my coat on. Truth to tell, I was a little bit annoyed, and I called this guy. His name was Glenn, and he said so fast. He said, "Oh, I'm so glad you called. My boss wants to talk to you." Bam, put me on hold. I had no time to say, "Who is this? What's this about?" And then the next thing I hear is a speakerphone and this booming voice that said, "Anita." And I said, "Hi." And the voice said, "I loved your book." And I said, "Thank you." And the voice said, "It's Oprah." And I was so stunned. I don't really remember anything about it. I do remember she said I couldn't tell anybody except my husband, my agent, and my editor. And then, you know, we had people in the room, and it was absolutely forbidden to tell anybody else because she wants to make the announcement. She's only called me to tell me so that they can print up a lot of books before she makes the announcement. And my husband, he sees my face, which is probably ashen, and he's standing across the room, and there are people in the room, and I can't tell him. I'm on the phone. And then at the end, it was so interesting. The book was Pilot's Wife. And at the end, she said, you know, at the end, how your mother, Catherine, doesn't tell Maddie what's really going on over in Ireland. And I said, yes. And she said, well, you know, I really don't believe in keeping secrets from the daughter. And it was, I didn't, you know, did she want me to rewrite it? I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know what that was all about. I was ready to, believe me. And then I went on the show, and she said that she said on the phone that I would not believe it, but that they were going to get hundreds of emails from women to whom this thing that happens to the character in the book, and I was just silently shaking my head. And in fact, they did, and they had 4 women on the show who. Now, for those of you who haven't read the book, this means nothing, and for those who have read the book, you don't know what I'm talking about. So it's kind of hard to talk about a specific book.
Can we say it involves betrayal? That's not giving too much away, is it?
It does. Yeah. Well, I mean, let me put it this way. The central character, Catherine, finds out her husband may not have been who she thought he was. And there may have been another family involved, just so pretty much given away the plot.
Well, that's it. Nobody wants to read The Pilot's Wife now. So there are all these women in the studio with the same experience as your character.
Oh my gosh, it was incredible. I was in the green room. We all arrived, some of us arrived at the hotel. You come in the night before to Chicago. And I was in the elevator, and I could tell there was a woman, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I could tell she was one of the women who was going to be in the show. But they had us in separate green rooms because they didn't want us talking to each other. We were supposed to just have it very spontaneous on the stage. But I was in the green room while they told their stories. And the most incredible thing is that I couldn't have written any one of those stories, the 4 of them, as a novel because you wouldn't have believed it. The old adage that truth is stranger than fiction is absolutely true. And by the time I came out, it was like, who needs the author? I mean, it was, you know, the women in the audience were sobbing at these stories of these women, and then I come out, you know, it was kind of funny.
And, well, Oprah, of course, really put you on the map and made you into one of the features made you into the big star you are now. I was thinking about your novels, and one thing that seems to run through them is this sense of dark events, of catastrophe, of tragedy, and dark beginnings and dark endings. And you're not, on the whole, a happy ending person, are you?
No, I'm not. There's like a glimmer in Rescue. That's all I can say.
There's a glimmer. Yeah,
I mean, but it's not a happy ending by any means because you're very conscious of a huge amount of loss that has taken place. That's fair.
There seems to be this belief, particularly in Hollywood, that we need to have happy endings. I mean, do you think that's a myth, that people don't really need that sense of everything ending?
Oh, I think it's foolish. I think it's fake. I think it's, you know, the reality is that there are tragic endings, and the reality is art for a long time has, you know, dealt very beautifully with tragedy. And it doesn't turn out all for the best. It just doesn't.
And one of the themes, I mean, on your website, you very helpfully pointed out some themes in your books, which are great.
I actually didn't. My editors did
Oh,
that.
well, they did a good job. They did a good job.
Because I'm not sure I could. You know, I don't.
It's hard when you're so close to it, I guess.
I wouldn't see the books in terms of themes necessarily.
But one of the themes I liked, which certainly I noticed in the books I've read of yours, which is the idea of women pushed to the edge and what they will do when they're pushed to the edge. So where does that come from, do you think?
Well, I think it really came originally, I got the idea from Weight of Water, which is about a woman who is pushed to the edge in every sense of the word. Or even earlier in Strange Fits of Passion, that's about an abused woman who gets in a car with her daughter and drives as far north in Maine as she can and drives right to the coast. And she said something like, it was as far as I could go without jumping off the continent. And the idea of being pushed to the edge by circumstances or by relationship or by finding oneself in the wrong relationship, and it's a wonderful crucible in which to put a character.
And one thing I'm very impressed with in your writing is the way that you enter the minds of so many different characters. That one would expect you to write from a woman's point of view, but you also write as a man or as a teenager or as a woman from the 19th century, for example. So, and there's I'm thinking particularly of your book Testimony. We've got a whole gallery of characters and stories told from all their points of view. How do you do that? I mean, I know that is it like being an actor entering into those people?
Sometimes I hear the voice, like one of the books I wrote, which is from the point of view of a man, is All He Ever Wanted, and it's also in a different era. It takes place in 1899 to 1914, and he's a pompous. He was a really fun writer to do. I mean, character to do. He's kind of a pompous, self-deceived, and yet yearning. I mean, he has this terrible yearning from the heart. And once I heard his voice, I wrote several sentences and I got the rhythm of his voice and I heard it, then I was good to go. And in Testimony, there were certain voices that I heard just immediately. The young teenage girl who has a very peculiar way of talking.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
She
I heard her voice straight away, and I heard the mother's voice, Ellen, straight away, and it just began to, and it was actually a very enjoyable book to write because I could never get bored with my characters, because just as soon as I thought, well, he or she has said enough, I could go on to another one.
So you didn't follow the threads through. You didn't have the write all one character's point of view first and then switch to another one. You went back and forth.
I went back and forth, but the trick was to tell the story in a linear way, so it still had the thread of suspense, even though they're all talking about ostensibly the same event.
And I mean, in every sense, your books are page turners, and that there's depth and there's emotion in them, but there's also a tremendous sense of, oh my God, what's going to happen next, and you have to keep reading. So is that something you work on and revise and really focus on when you're writing?
I do. I mean, sometimes it comes easier for some novels than for others. I like to read books like that are, my goal is to write a very well, arrestingly written book that has, it's not suspense in the sense that, it's not a thriller, but it's sort of, I like to think the thread of literary suspense in that you need to, there's a question asked at the beginning of the novel that you need to know the answer to. Yeah.
And I read that, in fact, Rescue, your latest book, started off, when you first started writing it, you wanted to write a thriller.
That's right. Every book is different, and I like to change it up, either the structure or the voice or the time period. I mean, that's what interests me. And I've had this yearning to write I guess you'd call it a taut mystery detective story, and I didn't want to use a regular detective because that's been done, and I didn't want to use a policeman and a police procedural because that's been done to death, but I needed somebody who knew the community intimately and had access to that community, and also had access to the police. So if necessary, he could go find out things that only the police know. And so I hit upon the idea of a paramedic, because they both arrive at the scene at the same time. They know each other really well in a small town, and a paramedic has a really intimate relationship with the people of the town. They hope to never see him, but when, they appreciate him when they need him. And so I thought, oh, this is terrific. I'm going to write my thriller, and I'm going to have this paramedic. And I got, about 40, 50 pages into the book, and it was clear that this was not going to be a detective mystery. It was going to be your typical Anita Shreve tragedy.
Can't get away from it.
And I'd love to be able to do it, but I don't think I can. I think that, even if I were to take on a pseudonym, I just don't think I'm capable of. It's a particular skill that you have to have.
Oh, well, it's to our benefit that it turns out to be another Anita Shreve novel, I reckon. And I really enjoyed reading the scenes where the paramedic is at his job, because they feel really authentic. There's lots of technical detail about what he does and so on. You must have researched that quite a bit, I guess.
I did. One of the things I wanted to do, in addition to writing a thriller, is I wanted to write a novel about a man doing his job, and you see his character through the way he does his job. And it's not enough to say he's a paramedic, you've got to see him be a paramedic. And so I read all the, Paramedic Volume 1, Paramedic Volume 2, and I actually felt at one point, a little bit more studying, I could probably pass the test. But that doesn't really, it helps me to some extent. It doesn't really do it for me as a novelist, because it's one thing to know the acronyms they use and to know the lingo, the procedures, but that's not, I had to know how they talk to each other, because they speak in a code, and they see so much death and traumatic experiences that they have a certain irony in the way they deal with it. They can't just take it in, absorb it the way we would time after time after time. So I found a paramedic in a small town in Vermont, and she helped me a lot. She would say, well, actually they do this first, and then they might say to each other, such and such, you take this, I'll do that, blah, blah, blah.
I wondered you'd actually gone out with her in the vehicle.
Well, we waited. I was invited to go out, and we waited, and we sat there for about 3 hours, and nothing happened. So
that's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terrible to be wishing for someone to have a traumatic accident. I was hoping for a 3-car collision, in which there'd be, Then I realized how awful that was. So I did get it. I did get the information.
Yeah, the character, the paramedic Webster, he's an interesting guy for one reason, because you read a lot of books where there's a woman who wants to rescue a damaged man, but it's the other way around here. It's Webster's a man. He's a nice straight guy, and he wants to rescue this damaged woman.
Well, she's, in addition to being damaged, she's also sexy and sassy.
Yeah, that probably has something to do with it.
And beautiful. The book opens when he extricates her from her antique, old, battered Cadillac that she'd wrapped around a tree, and she's drunk. So there's every single reason on earth not to go near this person. And he does something that paramedics don't normally do. He goes to the hospital to see how she is after, and she's just as, it's like she comes out of a coma and says this, sassy thing to him back. And she's trouble. She's trouble.
No, there's nothing like reading about a woman who's trouble.
Well, they're the fun characters. Yeah.
And I was wondering also, because you're seen as a writer of whether you like it or not, as women's fiction, and I was reading some reviews of your work on the web, and there's some fantastic, wonderful reviews, but there's also a few that are a little bit sniffy, if you know what I mean. And there's I read a description which really made me angry, which said that describing your work as not quite literary, whatever that means. Do you think that are people being anything derogatory about novels that appeal primarily to women? Is there some way in which they're seen as less up there than men's novels, do you think?
Well, I wish you'd sort of mentioned The Guardian, in which I was compared to Salman Rushdie and Philip Roth. And I forgot
those as well.
That was
those
also,
as well.
yeah,
Yes,
we forgot that one. Anyway, I do object to the word women's fiction. In my mother's day, she would have called it kitchen table books. And that was a phrase I'd never heard before, and someone told it to me. I think it's very dismissive to call something women's fiction. It's dismissive to the reader of it, and it's certainly dismissive of the writer, particularly somebody who has written about men and about from the point of view of men. And, you know, just because the work, you know, there are so many great works of art written by men that deal with matters of the heart. And, you know, A Long Day's Journey into Night by Eugene. They all sit in the same room and talk to each other about relationships and the mother. And it's a I think it used to be a useful category to explain what kind of a book something was. But you very rarely put someone into a category of men's fiction.
No. And people don't make derogatory remarks about men's fiction either, do they?
No. So I find it dismissive.
And I wondered also that, I mean, you're remarkably prolific. You produce a book every 18 months. I wonder again if that's something that some people see as somehow not quite right. You should be like Jonathan Franzen, spend 10 years on a book.
Yes, I know. I like to think about Updike, who wrote 43 books. I really, I'm happy in his being. Or Trollope. How many books did Trollope produce? An awful lot of them, I think.
A lot, yeah.
There was something you said earlier, though, that I really wanted to comment on about writing them. Oh gosh, I've forgotten. This is what happens. Can you remember the beginning of the question? Can you?
I can't remember.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think that the pace at which I write, and it's actually unusual because I write by hand. If I could write on the computer, I'd probably do a book every 9 months.
Wow.
Because it takes twice as long to actually write it. No, I think 18 months is about right, and that's the length of time the book wants to take. And if it wants to take 2 years, then it will take 2 years.
Well, the thing I admire particularly about that is that you can not just write a book in 18 months, but you can come up with the idea of a book so soon after the previous one and get straight back into it. Do you take a break between books or just straight on?
Not really. I don't take... The only break you really get is between the moment you hand in the manuscript and the moment you get it back, because you're completely in the clear. You can't work on one book. You can't be thinking about another book. You have a real vacation. And in the beginning, I used to say to my editor, I would hand it in on a Friday, and if I hadn't heard by Sunday night, I was all in panic. Oh, he hated it. He's just, it's terrible. Now I hand it to my editor and I say, listen, take your time. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that'll be great. So, but I was going to say that it's funny enough that I put that in there about Salman Rushdie and Philip Roth, but actually the article in The Guardian was about prolific writers and about writers who had been paid well for their work. And the idea was that if could Philip Roth have written 24 novels, and could he have in particular written the last 3, which was his I can't remember the name now, but and it was I thought it was an interesting point that sometimes the reason like a Jonathan Franzen, or I'm trying to think of somebody else in that ilk, takes that long to write a book is because that person has to teach. Or has to. In Franzen's case, that's not the case. He's, ridiculously best-selling. But a lot of writers write, but they have to be doing something else too to make ends meet.
Sure. Yeah. As you remember from your journalist days, it's pretty time-consuming. Yeah.
Right.
Another thing thing I want to ask you about is the importance of place in your books, because many of them seem to have a very vivid sense of place. And there's certain places on the New England coast, for example. The sea is a very important part of the landscape. And there's one house which I believe you've never been inside, but it features in 4 of your novels.
Yes, I have actually been inside it. It's not a real house. No, I mean, there was a house that inspired me when I wrote Pilot's Wife, which is the first novel that features the house, and there are 4 of them. And it was a beautiful mansard roofed house, and it had, that curved dormers, and it had many dormers, and it suggested many bedrooms. And the thing about being a fiction writer, which is so great, is I could pick up that house, I could make it a little bit bigger, I could stick it on the end of the rock, on a rock at the end of this 2-mile-long beach, and have 6 pairs of floor-to-ceiling windows. And so I wrote that, and it's 100 years old, this house. And at the time I wrote The Pilot's Wife, and then I began to think that any house with that kind of age has really dozens of stories to tell. So I went back 100 years and I wrote a novel about the family who lived in that house at the very beginning, and that book was Fortune's Rocks. And there were some features of the house that still remain. If I think a fan of mine or a reader of mine, if you open a novel and I refer to 6 pairs of floor-to-ceiling windows, I think I know that house right now. And then I was at a bookstore, giving a reading, and someone asked why I had set The Pilot's Wife and Fortune's Rocks in the same house. And I was talking about how a house with any kind of age has dozens of stories to tell. And I said, for example, you could do one during World War II or during the Great Depression. And the minute the words Great Depression were out of my mouth, this entire novel began to spool as I stood there. And I thought, what a great time to set. So after the reading was over, I went to the history section of the bookstore and got 3 books on the Great Depression. And that turned out to be Sea Glass, and the one remaining novel that takes place in the house is Body Surfing.
And another thing that there's also that, I saw a picture of it on the web again. There's a tiny little hut that was the house where the murders took place in Weight of Water. Yes,
on Smutty Nose Island. The Hunt Vent murder house. Yes.
And I looked at that and I thought, well, no wonder murders took place in that. How could people live together in that climate?
Oh, no wonder. Oh, and when you see the house, you can't imagine it. Now the only thing that exists is the footprint, and I can't tell you how small this. It was about as big as this. I'm not kidding. And 2 families lived in it, and it had, a wall between, and they never opened their windows from November to March. They had fire. They lit a fire every night. It was like staying in Nova Scotia in a house meant to be a summer house. That's how cold it was. The ice froze in the wells. They lived in this thick fog of smoke. Myron Hunt Vent smoked cigars and pipes with her husband every night. And the film, Catherine Bigelow, when she made the film Weight of Water, created an exact replica of the Hunt Vent murder house. And when we went on the set to see the movie being made, even I was astonished. Even though I'd seen the footprint, I was astonished at how small it was.
And you've written that the process of writing is like daydreaming. How does that happen?
Well, I think the part that I hope to achieve each day when I go to the desk is that I want to reach that place that feels like daydreaming. And I think we all experience it in exactly the same way I do when I'm writing, in that, let's say you're driving down a highway and you're thinking of a scene that took place the night before, and you're going over the dialogue and thinking, oh, I wish I'd said this, and oh, this would have been such a great comeback, and I wish I'd done that. And then you're thinking about going home and what you'll say to your husband or to your children or on the phone to somebody. You're inventing that conversation, and then all of a sudden you go, did I miss my exit? You know, you're in that realm that real life has left you, and that's exactly the realm in which a fiction writer operates. And you want to go there and stay there and keep inventing these conversations.
And yet there comes a point, presumably, where you pull out of it and you're analysing what you've written.
Well, a certain amount of craft is, a huge amount of craft is brought to bear, and that's the hard part.
And you like to set yourself craft challenges, don't you? I mean, if you're writing that many books, you need to do something a bit different each time.
Well, I think that was true right from the get-go. I think that I just, what interests me about writing is the language and the sentences and the structure of the book. I mean, you know, I have one book I wrote backwards, and that, you know, there was a reason for doing that, which the reader doesn't discover until the very last sentence. And that book, by the way, was The Last Time They Met, and the whole book turns on the last sentence. It just pivots. And I've gotten more mail about that book than just about anything. All the rest of them combined. And there are people who are of two minds about the end of that book. One of them, my favorite letter, was the woman who said, when I got to the end of The Last Time They Met, I screamed and fell off the couch.
I saw. I wasn't looking for you on this occasion, but I found recently a list of the best books with twists ever, and The Last Time They Met was on that list.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Good. Oh, good. I've had people write. I hated the ending of that book. You know, I threw my shoe across the room. I was furious.
You must get lots of mail from readers. What sort of things do they say? Is there something that's more common than anything else?
They're very, you know, people don't normally write to me to say they hate the books.
No, I wouldn't.
Although I did have one woman from Georgia, the state of Georgia in the States, write to me and say, it was very early on in my career, and I can't remember which book it was, but she said, you know, when I pay $26.99 for a book, I expect a better ending. And I now know what the book was. It was Where or When. And I sent her $26.99 back. And I told the incident to my editor, and he said that, well, they often get mail from irate readers, and what they do is ingenious. They just send another book by the writer and say, we hope you like this one better.
Oh. They can't keep on complaining after that, really, can they?
No.
Now, I've got to ask you, because there's a real life story that I love, which sounds just like the plot of one of your books, and that's how you met your third husband, your current husband, John. What happened?
We knew each other when we were 13, and we were, what is the word when you're 13? Sweethearts, I guess. At a summer camp, and we had 1 week together. And, you know, these first loves, they really stay with you for a long time. And what happened was, when we left each other, we lived at opposite ends of the states. And when you're 16, you could drive across the state if your father let you, which he probably wouldn't. But when you're 13, you can't. You're not going to say to your dad, hey, Dad, Saturday you want to drive me across the state so I can see my boyfriend? So we sort of lost touch. And then 31 years later, he saw a photograph of me in an ad for a book, and he wrote me a letter. I often say I fell in love with his penmanship. It was on beautiful, hard, stationery stock, you know, and beautiful, beautiful penmanship, and just said, are you the Anita Shreve who went to Rolling Ridge Camp in 61 or 63? And if you're not, if you are, I wonder if you remember me, and if you're not, good luck with your career. And I was intrigued enough that I wrote back, and we had a very long, old-fashioned correspondence, and then one day we met, and that was that.
And that was after you both been married to other people in the meantime.
Yes, it was the best of times and the worst of times.
Now, you're not. You said you're not an autobiographical writer, but there's such depth of emotion in your books. is that just something you draw out of yourself and put in your characters when you're writing? As simple as that.
I think so. I'm not aware of it. I mean, I'm aware that there's a well that I go to, and that well is familiar to me, and I know, I can still draw from it. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you why that's there or what specifically. I have never really gone to a psychiatrist, although, there were many times when that would have been a good idea. And I think that that well might have gotten, I might have talked it out. I might have, I think it's the thing from which I write, and the less I examine it, the better.
Yeah, because if you examine it, you might not be writing fiction anymore. It might dry up.
Right.
There's always that probability. Yeah. We'll take some questions from the audience in just a moment. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about influences, because I read that there's an Australian writer, Shirley Hazzard,
yes,
who you're very fond of.
Very fond of. I read her book, Transit of Venus, when it came out in 1980. And I have a friend who also is, very, very good reader. And we read the book simultaneously, and we were rhapsodic about this book. We just couldn't believe it, and I read it again. And since then, we keep recommending books to each other, and she will call, say, for example, I remember one time she called and she said, "Oh, have you read Evening by Susan Minot? Oh my God, it's fabulous." And then there's a pause, and then I'll say, "Is it Transit?" And there'll be a pause, and she'll say, "No." So it's sort of the litmus test by which we've judged books for the last 30 years. And I was absolutely astonished yesterday to find out I was doing a luncheon, and I realized that I was in her hometown. They did a setup question about who's your favorite author. They knew perfectly well what the answer was. And I went on and on at great length, and then I realized that I was in her hometown.
Oh, you might meet one of these days.
We have met. We have met.
Oh,
actually, it was very interesting. We met, it was so ironic. In the States, on Katie Couric, Good Morning America, I forget what the show was. It was not the Today Show, it was the other one. Actually, no, I'm wrong. It was the Today Show. And they had this thing where authors who were well-known could recommend authors who were not well-known. And their books would become like Oprah's book club, the book of the month. Yeah. And they picked me, I think coming off of the Pilot's Wife, because I was well known. It's such irony, because in the literary world, Shirley Hazzard is like a goddess, and I'm, barely register on the scale. But this was an opportunity that I had to introduce her to a very large audience. So we met, and she's very, very proper and very prim and lovely, lovely woman. And, we were sitting on the couch. Katie Couric was over there, and she and I are sitting on the couch. And, I was talking about why I picked her, and she was answering questions from Katie Couric. And all of a sudden we see Katie Couric go. She puts up a hand and puts her hand to her earpiece. And she said, "I have just gotten word, Shirley Hazzard, that your book has just been nominated for a National Book Award."
Wow.
And I loved it because I look like a genius. It was fantastic.
Yes, you do.
I know. And actually, she won the National Book Award. It was for The Great Fire.
Yeah,
but
she did.
It was really fun.
Well, has anyone got some questions? We've got microphones down the side here. So if you put up your hand and then wait till the microphone reaches you.
Plot your books?
I used to plot them obsessively in the early days. I wouldn't, what I'd plot, I'd outline what I was doing the next day, because I was so fearful I'd get in the middle of a book and not know my way out. And now I'm more confident, a little bit more confident. Although I wish I'd plotted the one I'm working on a little bit more, because it's causing me a lot of problems. And sometimes I'll start a novel now, and it'll just be 4 phrases. This happens, and that happens, and that happens, and that happens. But in the beginning, I did.
I was just curious, in terms of
I think it was asked but not quite answered, I don't think. In terms of your ideas for books, how they actually come about. Is it from a non-fiction perspective first, like you get an idea, you see something, you do some research and the ideas start forming, or is it from the imagination and then you do the research and the ideas start forming? And then, the second part of that question is, in terms of the writer's discipline as such, or the work, how do you actually plan your day in terms of your writing?
It's very dangerous to ask me a two-part question because I'm not likely to remember the first part. And I'm going to do it right now. What is the first part?
It's basically
just generating your ideas.
I knew that. I would have to answer that differently for every book because each book has a unique. Sometimes it's three threads that come together at a certain moment in time. I see a house I admire. I'm thinking about how do you ever know that you know a person, and the answer is that you don't. And then I'm thinking about something my father once told me. He was an airline pilot, that when there's a crash, the union always gets there first. And I happen to be thinking about these three things right at the same moment in time, and this novel begins to. In the case of Testimony, there were a number of scandals brought on by alcohol in school settings that had a sexual nature to them. And I had a teenage boy going through high school, and I was scared to death. So I think in that novel I wrote out my fears. The Weight of Water is based on a true story. Resistance is also based on a true story. And some of them just get spun out of, with cotton candy. They're just spun out of cotton candy.
Do you have a little file of true stories that you keep that might inspire you one day, or is it just more spontaneous than that?
No, I often have people come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, I got a wonderful story. It's an Anita Shreve novel," and they'll start to tell it to me, and I'll tell them to stop because it doesn't work. It has to come from inside me. It has to be something, some little element of it has to be something that I really. That intrigues me, and it doesn't translate. You can give me the most wonderful, suspenseful story in the world, but it just might leave me cold if it doesn't trigger the imagination.
Other question?
Sorry, that was just the second part. Just to remind
you. Yes, indeed. Yes, sorry, I should have reminded you. Yes, that was about the discipline, wasn't it?
Discipline. I'm disciplined. I get up in the morning. I go to my desk. I have coffee and breakfast very quickly, and I go to my desk in my bathrobe. And I work from about 7:30 to 12:30, about 5 hours. And I know really to the minute when the work is done because I've been doing this for years, and I know that anything written after that time is not worth keeping. And I don't sit around waiting for the muse to strike. I think being a journalist all those years has taught me that you just sit down and you start to work. And I usually do it by editing what I did the day before and then just continuing on after that.
In reading your novels, I'm always impressed by your observance of people's kindness or bitterness and the characteristics of most people, around have. Do you observe people a lot?
I do. I observe people a lot, but I'm also drawing from. It's a combination of imagination and memory. I couldn't know about kindness unless I'd seen it or experienced it, and I couldn't know about bitterness unless I'd seen the particular way a mouth looks like on a bitter woman. It might be that little detail, and that's, it draws from everything, things I've read, things I've experienced. I might not even know I've seen it or not be able to tell you where it came from. I think this woman here needs a microphone in front of her.
Sorry. Do you say that you edit the next day, you go back and edit. Then do you do another edit right through at the end of that?
No, I don't go forward until what I've written is what I consider is best I can do.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
I will have certain things that will happen when, this happens to me more often than it should, that I'll get to page 70 or 100 and I'll realize I shouldn't have told the story in first-person point of view. It really needed to be told in third-person point of view. And there's no button that you can push to fix that. You have to rewrite every sentence. And sometimes something really magical will come out of that, something that's a lot better than what you originally did. But for some reason, I have a hard time settling on the points of view. I know that there were some people back here. Yes, this gentleman, yes.
Anita, I really enjoy reading your books, and I'm very pleased to hear that I'm not hooked on female fiction. A male question.
Yes.
I'm always interested in the physical locations of stories, and I wonder how you go about researching that. And have you climbed Mount Kenya?
Yes, I have. Yes. Oh. Yes. That was Change of Altitude is the book that he's referring to, and it's a kind of a visceral rendition of this character climbing Mount Kenya, a woman who has absolutely should not be on that mountain. And I did climb it, and actually the true story is actually I climbed it in my sneakers, and I didn't put that in because I figured that absolutely no one would believe that, because it was such a stupid thing to do. And but it's not a true story in the sense that it actually happened, but I did climb the mountain. I know exactly what some of those features were like. And it was miserable, and I hated it. And it was, the irony, I was the slowest person up the mountain. There was a party of 6, and it was misery, because I'd be the slowest person going up, and of course everybody else, when I got to that plateau, had had their rest, and they said, okay, let's go. And I'm like dying. And as a result of that, when we got to Top Hut, which is the last station before you actually go up the summit, I was the only one who had acclimated. I was the only one who wasn't sick from altitude sickness. And I'm just standing there. Everybody else has got a headache and going, oh my God. And the guide says to me, you want to go? And I said, sure. So, but the joke was on me in the end, because when I got to the top, it was a thick fog and it was snowing and I couldn't see my hand in front of me. And the whole thing was really miserable. Yes, I see a hand here.
I've had my hand up a couple of times. I've loved every book that you've written. I really look forward to every one that comes along, and 18 months is just too long for me. But anyway, I'm not a writer, so I can't appreciate how much work you put into everything. But I'd just like to know a couple of questions. Firstly, who were your early influences, the early authors? And what sort of environment do you work in? Are you a city person, a country person? And just another Australian author you might like to... No, I'm just recommending another Australian author, Ilsa Evans, if you haven't read her yet. She's well worth looking at.
Oh, I will. I will, definitely.
So who are your early influences, and where and what sort of environment do you live in?
Early influences, when I was a junior in high school, I read Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, which is a very stark, bleak novel, and I read it a winter Sunday, and the environment outside my window was exactly similar to the interior of the novel, and something kind of incredible happened, and I realized that that may have been my first realization that I wanted, seriously wanted to be a writer. Mm-hmm. And I also read all the plays of Eugene O'Neill, and it's hard to say whether he influenced me, and that's why I write was tragedies, or whether I was drawn to him because he wrote tragedies. And the funny thing is, he was like a god to me. Nobody reads all of Eugene O'Neill's plays. Some of them are really bad, and some of them are, and so I read everything. I read it twice, I think. And several years ago, I had seen Long Day's Journey into Night as a film, and I'd seen it as a play, and I recently went, and you saw it on Broadway. I've forgotten how long a play it is, and I could not wait to get out of that theater. And I realized that Eugene O'Neill is really awfully clunky in places, and it really needs to be streamlined. So, although he was an early influence, I don't think I'll be reading his work anytime soon. And as to the environment, all I need is a desk, a piece of paper, and a pen. Doesn't matter if it's a city. I live
Not even a
both.
computer. Do you ever, at any stage, move to a computer?
Well, I write by hand, and then I transfer it to the computer. I print it out. I do the editing by hand, and then I use it really as a processor. It's very, very helpful to me. I started writing in the days when you had carbon paper, which was hideous. So it's a great tool, but I can't write on the computer. I can't actually compose on. I've tried it, and the results are not good.
Down the back there?
There's someone way in the back. I feel
Yeah.
like I've not paid enough attention.
Thank you. Anita, I'm also a man.
Thank you. I'm very heartened by that.
And I came along without my wife. I'm here on my own. The concept or the idea that you're a woman's writer, a writer for women is just wrong. I mean, you're a writer. And you're a truly gifted one. To me, your greatest gift is the ability to get so deeply inside human relationships, whether it's the mother and son in Testimony or the husband and wife on the Mount Kenya. I mean, you kind of touched on this, but you could just go a little bit more into where you think that comes from. Is it people you've known? Where does it come from? It's just a remarkable gift you have.
Thank you very much for everything that you said. It is a process, obviously it comes from somewhere. I mean, I can't know what this is unless I have some knowledge of it. But this is very true. If the imagination is not triggered, there will be no fiction. It's not enough to have experienced this or to know someone. In fact, it's best not to be thinking about that. The way I do it is that I put myself in that person's shoes, minute by minute by minute. If there's a knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning and a woman has to open that door, I'm opening that door. And I'm saying to myself, I'm getting the news. How do I react? Do I bend over? Am I silent? Do I scream? Do I back up? I take that character minute by minute by minute, and I like writing from a man's point of view too. There are universal experiences that we all have, and that allows me really to do that. But thank you very much.
I think we've got time for just one more question. Who's been waiting? This lady here.
I'm an avid reader and I read many books, 2 or 3 books a week, and I get very involved in the books. How do you turn yourself off when you're writing a book? Do you still think about the book when you're doing the ironing or watching 2.5 Men, or are you able to turn yourself off?
And I don't iron, but actually, it's really. I've never heard another writer talk about this, so I don't know if it's peculiar to me or if other writers experience it and just don't talk about it. The transition from my writing part of my day to my regular part of my day is wicked. I can't. It's taken me all this time to try to figure out a way to do it, and I've never been successful. It's always difficult. I tried taking a shower and then having my lunch. I tried taking a walk and then having the shower, and then I've tried everything that I can think of, and my husband would tell you if he were sitting here, do not have a conversation with Anita until 2 hours has elapsed, because it takes her that long to pull out. And yes, I do think about all this time that I've been here in Australia. In the back of my mind is this big, huge, looming deadline that I have, and I'm thinking about the book all the time.
Do you stay awake at night thinking about your characters, what you're going to do with them?
No, I don't at night. I'm pretty much in the clear at night, and I write in the morning. When I'm close to a deadline, I will write a lot more during the day. I don't think I've ever written a word after 5 o'clock at night.
Well, that brings us to the end of our words today, I think. And Anita will be signing books for you shortly. But first, I'd like you to join me in thanking her for appearing to us.